Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 8th installment in my Capstone album review series, a collection of videos where I dissect some of my favorite albums using what I've learned in the sound recording and technology program at Montgomery County Community College. If you missed part 7, where I finally got to gush about my favorite album of all time, Lift Your Skinny Fists Like Antennas to Heaven by Godspeed You Black Emperor, I will leave a video card for that right up here, but without further ado, let's get into it. Out of every album I've chosen for this series, I think both The Turning Wheel and today's album are the biggest examples of me sneaking in one of my own personal favorites, regardless of any widespread impact they've had. Not that they haven't had their fair share of that by any means, but what these albums represent to me is more so a very unique mastery of the genres and sounds that they work within, to an extent that they completely rewired my expectations for what their respective genres could be. Today's candidate in that lane is the 2003 studio album from Lightning Bolt, Wonderful Rainbow. Lightning Bolt is a noise rock duo formed out of Providence, Rhode Island by drummer Brian Chippendale and bass guitarist Brian Gibson. The two of them have been at it ever since the late 90s, kicking off their career with their self-titled album in 1999, a very lo-fi and live noise and math rock experience that, while certainly very rough around the edges, showed a ton of promise leading up to their sophomore record, Ride the Skies, the band's first proper collection of studio recordings. Tracks like 13 Monsters garnered a ton of attention toward the outrageously loud duo, winning over tons of underground rock fans with unpredictable, off-kilter math rock grooves and enough volume to convince you the band had at least 3 times the members it actually did. What the band lacked in memorable melodies outside of a few moments, they made up for with some of the most mind-bending tones you've ever heard. However, with the release of Wonderful Rainbow, what they once shied away from arguably became their strongest asset, combining their manic aptitude for noise and rabid math rock grooves with a newfound knack for sticky, hummable melodies, a set of qualities that would persist through their next 2 studio albums, Hyper Magic Mountain and Earthly Delights, completing what is very likely my favorite album trilogy of all time. Hello Morning leads us into the album with a stew of somewhat ambient guitar tones floating aimlessly for just under a minute, right up until a blast of feedback kickstarts the first full track of the album, Assassins. It's a nuclear barrage of insanely quick drum fills provided by Chippendale and a frantic bass guitar melody from Gibson that ends with this recognizable ascent, eventually shifting up an octave before repeating the aforementioned 4-note ascent throughout the bulk of the track. As it continues, Gibson adds a few different accents to his guitar part, whilst Chippendale's drumming gets louder and more explosive, all before it culminates in this awesome alteration of the foundational riff, rising it till it reaches a single bass guitar screech and then repeating again and again. I should also mention the odd nature of Chippendale's vocals, not only here but on the album as a whole. His vocals are recorded with this uniquely low-quality microphone attached to a torn-up mask that he wears both during recording and the duo's live sets. And what it turns out is a vocal that sounds more like a messed-up drive-thru speaker at your local fast food chain. Because of this, his vocals are mostly used as another instrumental layer to beef up the already huge bass guitar parts, with a few minor exceptions. One of those exceptions is on the following track, Dracula Mountain, a 2-parter that kicks off with a lyrical repetition from Chippendale that melodically reads like a little kid teasing you with some devious nursery rhyme he learned on the playground, saying, "See you in the evening, see you in the dawn, see you in the daylight and in the beyond." The first half features another rising bass guitar melody, intermittently broken up by these matched staccato bass guitar and vocal notes that come in at different spots and frequencies during each bar. It then dissolves into a single strummed bass tone in quarter notes, with progressively shorter sections ending in some rapid-fire snare and high-octave tone hits, the likes of which sound almost like a hyena laughing. The song's second half once again kicks off with the same vocal part as in the beginning of the track, but the following bass guitar riff directly follows its melody, then quickly moves in. The song's second half once again kicks off with the same vocal part as in the beginning of the track, but the following bass guitar riff directly follows its melody, then quickly moves an octave lower as Chippendale's chaotic drum fills come into play. Speaking of which, I love the thin snare tone that Chippendale has on his drum kit. It cuts through the mixes so nicely, and it's kind of required when Gibson's bass guitar is always causing so much noise. Coincidentally, the following two towers presents the perfect environment for it to shine, as the bulk of the track is built on two repeating bass guitar notes playing at a constant speed. Meanwhile, Chippendale takes the opportunity to frequently switch through syncopated rhythms as it continues, creating all these odd timing changes that turn an otherwise uninteresting riff into one that offers something unexpected every few seconds. I also love how the track reaches a boiling point at its last leg, with more quarter note snare hits and Gibson's bass guitar ringing out louder than ever. On Fire, in a way, flips a lot of the musical ideas that we've seen thus far, repeating a descending bass guitar riff intermittently broken up by low bass notes, as opposed to the rising melody broken up by higher octave notes on Dracula Mountain. There's a bunch of creative choices in this track that I get quite the kick out of as well, like the victorious laugh that Chippendale does in the little breakdown section splitting up the two riffs, or even the freeform drum freakout that closes the entire track out. Crown of Storms notably slows down the tempo quite a bit and features a march-like groove made up of half-note slams of deep bass notes and the kick on the drum kit, both breaking up the crazy rock guitar solo adjacent melody as if it's getting ducked by heavy sidechain compression. The intercom quality vocals add to the song's march-like qualities as well, though the authoritative tone they display is juxtaposed with the song's supernatural lyrics, supposedly about learning to fly together and walk through walls like ghosts. The following long stocking surprisingly feels more in line with an early 2000s lo-fi indie rock song, with the energy toned down to an unexpected degree. At least until the last leg, where everything just completely erupts with no recognizable structure, completely bombarding the listener with an onslaught of freakish tones and a blistering drum solo. We're only granted a fleeting moment of rest before the aptly titled 30,000 Monkeys, another bombardment of dissonant, high-pitched chords and free-form drums that really do sound like getting ripped apart by thousands of feral monkeys. Even the last breakdown of the song, the single moment where proper rhythmic structure comes back into the fold, sounds like it came from some messed up alternate version of that nursery rhyme, Five Little Monkeys. Closing out Wonderful Rainbow is the 6-minute Duel in the Deep, a fitting title given its very destructive progression. The entire track is this gradual increase in tension that comes as a result of Gibson's bass guitar gradually getting louder and louder as he hits these earth-shatteringly deep tones that just dissolve into some of the most crushing noise I've ever heard, supplemented by this repetitive drum groove that also gets more violent and distorted in conjunction with the bass guitar. Similarly to 30,000 Monkeys, it really does feel exactly how it's described. I can imagine two of the most territorial prehistoric beasts battling it out hundreds of feet below the surface of the ocean, causing colossal earthquakes and terrain-transforming tsunamis in the process. The duo really fires on all cylinders for this grand finale, and I honestly don't think it could have been executed any better. Wonderful Rainbow has been one of the most addicting albums I've ever listened to, and I suspect a lot of that comes down to its infectious energy and very unique sound. It even stands out quite boldly in how it's presented as well, with its cover displaying a colorful, childlike rainbow over top a dark gray collection of random shapes and objects. Even the song's titles read like they were made by a child imagining their own fictional world to exist within. It's likely my favorite noise rock album of all time, and it was actually my introduction to Lightning Bolt as a duo. They've ended up becoming a personal favorite band of mine thanks to their creative consistency, something you might not expect to be as strong as it is given the size of the band and their tendency to stick with the same, or at least very similar, formula over the course of their early career. I think Wonderful Rainbow is a fantastic starting point for anyone who wants to get into their material as well, as it's the beginning of an incredible trilogy and also feels separated enough from their earlier math-heavy work in such a way that it'd be more appealing to the average listener who wants to get into noise rock. It's very much worth a listen in my eyes, but let me know what you all think of it down in the comments below. The next entry is going to be the last in this Capstone album review series, and it's a landmark release within the movement that it's considered a very major part of. I'm so excited to get into it as I feel it's one of the best written albums of the 90s, if not of all time. So stay tuned for the next video, and I will see you all then.